Hi Lancers, this is Robin Thompson, and this is my presentation regarding private and public entities and whether they are alike in all unimportant ways or not. So I'm going to be talking about the law enforcement of the public sector versus a private security company that's hired by somebody from the public or some sort of organization. And just kind of comparing some of the um, ways that they maybe manage, that they go about their policy and their processes, and also their efficiency with the output that they produce. So public police or public law enforcement, whether it's sheriff, city, or county, um, they're required to, basically protect the public. They're the welfare and safety of the public, and that can be provided at either local, county, state, or federal level. And they often have very strict requirements just getting into that line of work, coming from training and verification, background checks, etc. There's a lot of politics and government establishments that control them, but their main welfare is the safety of the public. And that's also the mission or goal of a private security company. They're also required to, protect, but the difference is that the private security company is generally hired to protect a particular individual or a particular piece of property. And the public sector, they're actually required and have a duty to protect all people and all property at all times. So there is a difference. While it is safety as our mission, it's not necessarily safety at the same standards. So when we talk about the use of public authority, and the public sector often uses their authority. They have this badge. Everybody recognizes their badge. And citizens kind of choose to follow the law or not. And if they don't, then law enforcement is required to step in and possibly force them to comply. They are subjected to arrests, paying fines and fees, community service, etc. Whereas a security guard doesn't necessarily have the same options when it comes to enforcing laws or regulations. They generally end up calling the real authority, which ends up being the public sector law enforcement. So, we kind of begin to question, where do they get this power? How are they able to enforce this power, and how really good are they at it? So there's a lot of factors when it comes to law enforcement, but in order for them to enforce these laws or rules or regulations, they have to be formal, they have to be written, and they also have to have this hierarchy structure. And they're also held accountable when they do or do not follow the laws, meaning a police officer can still be required to follow the protocol and the formal way that they're supposed to, make a citation or make an arrest. So while there are these formal written rules, they're very clear in regards to how they are to go about enforcing them. But we kind of think about, how do these rules get passed? And throughout the past century or so, laws have changed, things have changed. But if we even go back to the 18th century with Woodrow Wilson, and we think about the way that he began to reform and the way that we really think about politics and administration and how they really need to be separate from one another, and that people should and can be productive and efficient at the same time. That wasn't really something that was done in the past, but he really believed that these things should be done. And one of the ways that these things happen kind of goes back to even the Pendleton Act is with merit. And it shouldn't matter who you know or how much money you have, but the Pendleton Act kind of enforced, you need to have this job or get this promotion because it's something that's something earned. It's not given. It's something achieved, not just handed out. And Frederick Taylor, in 1912, with his time and motion studies, really began to feel that workers could do more, produce more. But in order to do so, he felt that there needed to be defined roles, specific trainings, and really this development of workers needed to be consistent in order to be able to achieve the goals or vision or mission of the organization. And he kind of felt that people could do more with less, and that's really what his studies came down to. But as we tie this kind of into the public and private security, we can see that public security has a much more stringent training and requirements in order to do the job. There's, physical agility tests, there's vision tests, drug tests, background checks, they check your driving record, etc. And when these requirements are met, they hire the most qualified candidates, those with the most merit. And they're doing so in a way that people will be able to better perform this specific duty or task that they're hired to do so. And this will then in turn make them more efficient. They will provide better results. It'll kind of create this sense of harmony within the division. And I think also that this is a characteristic of bureaucracy, and I think of Max Weber when I think of this. And I think of this as more of a distribution of activities, that these rules are backed up by a sense of means to ensure that commands are followed, and that you have the right people, you have the right qualified people in place to actually perform the job duties. So in addition, as far as efficiency goes, the department is structured in a hierarchical format. There's captains, there's sergeants, there's lieutenants, there's officers, and each position is clearly defined, and each position has its specific roles and responsibilities. And this kind of ties into Luther Gulick and his contributions in regards to the division of work and how critical this is for an organization. And we can kind of even take it in a little bit further, and we think about detectives, let's say. There's detectives, there's correctional officers. Every person must be skilled in its own way. So in a sense, the work is subdivided up. And you have the best skilled and specialized workers in place in each specific department or organization. And I know we've all talked about POSCORB and the planning and organizing, staffing, directing, etc. But all these are very specific components of public sector law enforcement. When you think about private security offers, they don't really have to go through as many background checks or as much education. Yes, there may be some companies that require those things, but it's because of their own doing. Whereas the public sector law enforcement, they're more so mandated to do this. And just thinking of an example, private security offers, they don't carry guns. They're not driving government-owned vehicles. They're very limited in scope in regards to what discipline and enforcement of laws that they can even inflict upon a potential suspect. So they really don't have the same rights. I'm sure, maybe their training, maybe they still have to go through some sort of agility training, but it's not to the same component or level that it is at the public sector. And also, they're not receiving money from the government to perform these duties. They're hired privately, so the company itself gets to set the wages, whereas the public sector, there's clearly defined pay scales with, increases, and it's very defined in regards to what you could possibly make at each section. And the public sector law enforcement, I do feel that it's ran in a very bureaucratic manner. The management theory of Max Weber did piggyback off of Taylor and his efficiency concept, but he really believed that efficiency is not always the highest of concern in the public for leaders to implement. And, really there needed to be, as we talked about, those defined roles, and we can really see those in public law enforcement. Each position in itself is created with specific metrics such as education and agility, their work experience, and it works. And each position is clearly specialized. And as long as each person stays in their own lane, per se, it's not going to disturb the structure of the hierarchy. So if you're a lieutenant, you have certain tasks and you don't want to cross over into something that your higher up might actually do. Everybody has their own set of rules and expectations that they're to follow. And also, as far as the private or the public sector, they're very meticulous in record keeping, which is something that bureaucracy kind of really stuck towards. Is, they have, these reports that they have to do. They're very meticulous. They're held accountable for this. The officers held accountable, the departments held accountable, and they really often face a lot of scrutiny from the public when they don't follow these things. Workers are, even simple things. Workers are required to keep track of their time. They're required to just basically keep extremely detailed records of incidents and of their day-to-day duties. And the private sector, of course, runs more like a business. It's in it for the money. And I know the dichotomy strengthened this belief of Wilson's that we need to make government run less like a business so that the organization itself can strengthen and purify the organization and cultivate its dutifulness. And if we follow that in the public sector, it would work better. If law enforcement was paid based off of arrests or paid based off of, citations that they write, or they were, given incentives for certain types of citations or different types of arrests, then that really would cross over into a boundary of, ethical purposes. And the role of the government is to, of course, be fair and provide equality for all. And kind of even you think about our Constitution and all of the amendments that we have, the articles that we have. Everybody, has the right to due process and freedom of speech, and we can go on and on about really we're focused on being honest and ethical and being fair to all. So if the public sector was to try and act like a public entity when it came to this, then that would be bad. So Graham Allison really points out specific ways in which public and private entities are alike, such as their human resources activities. They both have a duty to protect. They have, to schedule and research criteria for various calls that they get. They have to manage and allocate resources on a day-to-day basis. But their organizations are very, very different. And one of those ways is the performance management. And the private sector is definitely measured on profitability, and performance, and maybe their market share. But the public sector is not. The public sector has a lot more pressure from the media, and we face a lot more scrutiny on a daily basis in regards to the actions of officers that are on the street. So I do feel like the public sector, speaking on law enforcement, is really in the middle of a lot of wicked problems of society, and they're dealing with these problems that are difficult, and they're most often impossible to solve and confront. And even if we adapt some of the private sector business practices into the public sector, I really don't feel that the result would change. We would still have a wicked problem. And in addition, we wouldn't be equipped, we wouldn't have the right resources, we wouldn't have the right tools to be able to offer the services the public needs, much less the demands of the public. So we can't necessarily mix and mingle the two because our Constitution does not allow us to mix them. And the Constitution doesn't promote efficiency, but it rather wants to exercise its arbitrary power. So in thinking that even the first and second and third articles of the Constitution directly address the reasons why the public cannot and will not ever function as a private organization. So when I'm asked, are public and private entities alike in unimportant ways? Yes, they are. So the more important question and answer to this is they are not alike in all important ways, which I feel is a much bigger deal. Thank you.